which is, I'll call it nothing more than the Dov Hikind Kerfuffle, which is about Dov Hikind, who is an assemblyman from Brooklyn, from Borough Park and Midwood, and dressed up as a basketball player for Purim, but not just any basketball player, one with a very large afro and blackface pictures. So we have two analysts on the line, Hunter Walker, senior editor of The Observer, who broke the story on the Politicker website, as well as Adam Dickter from the Jewish Week, who has covered Brooklyn politics and Jewish politics for quite a long time. I don't want to mess around with Adam's age, but he's also covered Dov Hikind for many, many years. So welcome to Spin Class, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Okay, so Hunter, I'll let you have the first crack at it since you're the one who got the story out there. And Dov Hikind is not a racist. I can say that as an absolute certainty. I have known the man for a very long time, as have many others, and he's actually been a bridge builder between the African-American and the Jewish communities, and a very effective bridge builder, I should say. But the bottom line is, what was he thinking?
Well, first off, you referred to this as the Dov Hikind Purim Kerfuffle. I'd like to propose we could call it the Dov Hikind Purim Spiel.
Okay.
We call it Hikind Hijinks.
But, I don't think, I think specifically Bill Thompson has acknowledged what you were saying, is that, the Assemblyman has worked a lot to build bridges between those communities. And having, when I initially spoke to him, it was very clear to me in our conversation that, he, as he said, was not aware that there was any chance or way that this could be perceived as offensive. So, I don't think this was a deliberate attack on his part, but I certainly think, a lot of the people I've spoken to say it's one thing to have been unaware and to have done this. It's another, once you're kind of told that people are outraged, to not sort of more fully apologize.
So, Adam, is the idea that he should have just kind of come clean and said, I blew it here? Or was his apology not good enough when he said, I'm sorry if people were offended?
Well, sure.
What's the problem here?
It's another one of these scandals where we see where someone digs himself deeper and deeper into it. We saw it with Anthony Weiner when he denied that he sent that tweet for a while. Al D'Amato also denied initially that he called Chuck Schumer a putz head. And you see that these politicians sometimes dig themselves deeper and deeper into the situation, making a short story into a 2-day story, maybe a 3-day story. But I agree with I agree that he really didn't. He seemed to be taken aback by the whole thing and amazed that this was a story, because he comes from a community where people do dress outrageously and probably try to top each other by being outrageous. And surely was not meant the way those firefighters who were fired years ago for doing a parade.
In Broad Channel, yeah.
Yeah, Broad Channel. They clearly were trying to mock and to be disrespectful. This is not what he was thinking, and I think it shows, because when people called up, he was just, for a whole day just kind of completely amazed that this was becoming a story, because he clearly didn't mean it that way. So you do have to look at what somebody's mindset is and taking these things into consideration. So, of course, he made it worse by not immediately saying, that I was out of line and I'm sorry. But it does show that if he did have some clue that this was going to be that offensive, he would have immediately, when called upon it, when the picture first came out on Facebook, have been more, introspective about it and said, wow, that was really wrong of me.
So, Hunter, I guess the question is, for an enterprising reporter like yourself, is nothing sacred. His son put this picture up. It was a private family moment.
You can have I'm not Facebook friends with Yoni, and you can use your Facebook privately. His settings are such that this was public, and I was able to see it. And a lot of the other comments he's put up on Facebook in the aftermath of this, such as the one where he said he thought his father was being more like Gaddafi, such as the one where he said he's sure that a Jewish person leaked this. All of that has been public and viewable, and was quoted by us and New York Magazine and other people. Also, as Assemblyman Hikind said to me initially and has been said repeatedly, and I think this is quite admirable, that was sort of a public event. He opens his doors literally with a sign out front to the community for over 12 hours on Purim. So, I would sort of reject the notion this was, something that happened in private.
But yet, nobody who came, according to Dove, nobody who came there complained or had any complaints. Does that speak to, Adam,
Yeah, I spoke to Dove on.
Is that an issue for the Jewish community, though, that nobody really realized that this was offensive?
That's interesting in itself, and I think there's, like, when I first heard about this, I thought my first thought was, when you stay in your own, forgive me for using the word shtetl, when you stay in your own community.
You could say ghetto, shtetl.
Yeah, the ghetto mentality of you're only really thinking about your own sensitivities of your community and what's important to your community. But that's what my first thought. But then I thought to myself, wait, this is not a guy that stays in his community. He goes to Albany and he meets with people from all over the state, and he should know, more of what their concerns are. So I think there's a lesson there. When I spoke to him, two things. First of all, as far as the Facebook picture, I asked him if he was angry that his son put it there, and he said no. He asked me beforehand if it was okay. Again, showing that he really didn't think there was going to be any big deal about it. And also, he really came across as having no real understanding about what really caused the anger. Is that years ago they did these minstrel shows where they deliberately mocked and dehumanized African Americans. And I think that he said he had like a vague understanding of that, but really not as much as he needed to have thought to himself. And all the people who visited as well didn't have that history to know that this is not just dressing crazy. This is bringing back an era where people tried to deliberately dehumanize and ridicule people.
So, gentlemen, go ahead, Hunter.
Oh, I would say I absolutely agree with that. It's really about the historical context of
which was missing,
wearing black face paint, and it connects to a history of really, really offensive stuff. And I think, let's say you wanted to dress up as a basketball player and you wore a Carmelo Anthony jersey and an orange sweatband, no one would have any objection to it. But, there is this context that I'm sure he was not aware of, about where the second you put on the face paint, it connects to this really troubling history for people.
So let's talk about the Hikind brand, because that's an important brand in New York City, New York State politics. And what does this do to the Hikind brand? I think you guys have both written about it. So let's get your take. Adam?
Mm-hmm. It's a very good question. I think that his brand it's on his 30th year. I think he's about 62 years old. He's been in office since the early 80s. And it's an important brand because he has created the perception. And if you look at different political races in which he's been involved, you can parse whether or not it's true. But definitely a perception that he's an entree to a tremendous amount of voting blocks, not only in his own district, but elsewhere in the city, that he can give what you might call hashkacha to a candidate. And people come calling, people from state races, representative of national campaigns. Hillary Clinton was very, very interested in having his endorsement when she ran for Senate in 2000. In the end, he didn't give it because it was I think he wanted to, but it would have been probably the end of him in his community politically if he had. So he's definitely well sought after. What does this do to his brand? I think it's a big hit because I think certainly African-American candidates in the future might not want to have their opponents say, well, you're looking for Hikind's endorsement, or flash that picture, on their blog. So that's harmful to him. So he has some ground to make up as far as the brand. But the bigger problem for him, I think, is that he's been around for so long that I think he's starting to feel younger people. I mean, the last election that he had, he completely blew the other person away, 96% of the vote.
Well, but let me point out. Yeah, but let me point out that wasn't a candidate running on a major party line.
Right.
He had no Republican, as a Democrat, he had no Republican or even conservative opposition. So.
I think sooner or later he's going to have to worry about demographic shifts. He's going to have to worry about younger people who have more of a history of involvement in the community, making a name for themselves and possibly challenging him. I think for any near future, his seat is secure, and he'll probably rebound from this. But he certainly, has to be careful not to do anything like that in the future. When you do something once, that stays in the public's mind. If you do something later on that cements that impression, like Al D'Amato I mentioned before, he had, some controversial things that he had said, ethnic-related things, and I think when you add to it, that cements that reputation in place. When you do it once, then people look at it as an aberration. So he's got to be very, very careful from now on.
But this is a big year. This story comes on the heels of Saturday's story in the New York Times of Bill Thompson, who is a longtime Hikind ally, his success in courting the Orthodox Jewish community, Hunter. So where does Bill Thompson, yes, he put out a statement, but it certainly wasn't any way condemning him, though. He did not distance himself from Dove. He didn't say, I don't want this gentleman's endorsement. He basically said, I look forward to working with him.
As you noted, we did some sort of follow-up reporting on what happened here. And what I heard from a lot of people involved in the mayor's race and involved in the local scene over there is that both Bill de Blasio and Bill Thompson are seen as still courting Dov Hikin's endorsement. And the way they handled this didn't seem to indicate that they're going to step away from that, if that is indeed what they're doing. And, the angle we took was that it seems like he was uniquely able to survive this backlash. I mean, what people kept telling me is that had this been another assemblyman, say, upstate, they might have even been pushed out of office. And not only is his seat not in danger, but he certainly wasn't getting really, really strong active rebuke from other politicians. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that whether or not it's accurate, he's perceived as, a really important gatekeeper in Orthodox Brooklyn.
But Adam, the two colleagues, I guess, in government, Simcha Felder and David Greenfield, who both serve alongside him in different positions in the same neighborhood, both made statements. I wouldn't call them condemnation, but they certainly put some distance, and they certainly made it clear that they felt it was wrong.
Yeah, I spoke to Simcha, and I think both of their statements were also very nuanced, like the mayoral candidate saying that I wouldn't have done it. I think it was insensitive. But it's all within the context of saying, this was crazy. But I don't think anybody other than maybe Charles Barron is saying, Dov Hikind is a racist and he shouldn't serve in office anymore. I think there were some elected officials that gathered at City Hall to say that. I think if it was another elected official that there might be more...
Mayor Bloomberg during the news conference shouted that he agrees.
Oh, yeah.
Which was kind of surprising.
Yeah. I think another elected official, there might be more of a movement to censure him in his house to have some kind of a statement. But I think this will pass now. And, like I said, as long as he doesn't do anything, I think those statements from the mayoral candidates were sincere because they honestly didn't believe that really represented, his mindset. They believe that he was somebody they can work with who's been helpful to them. I think they look at, as I mentioned before, it might be a problem for them if they're campaigning, that an opponent might bring it up, why you're seeking his endorsement. But I do think that it's not only political pragmatics, but also a heartfelt belief that this was not something that really showed malice in his heart.
Yeah, I mean, the only people that we really saw take it beyond saying, I disagree with this, were Charles Barron and also the Council of American Islamic Relations, CAIR. And both Barron and Kerr were calling for him to be removed from his position as assistant majority leader. But nobody else really did take it there.
And they were not big Hikind cheerleaders before this happened.
Right. They've had their own issues on the side. But
Kareem Kamara, who was the head of the minority caucus in the assembly, came out after that, and I believe in the Daily News, and said, I think this is over. We need to move on.
Right. Jumaane Williams also,
I think. It's a very important statement for Hikind.
Look, I agree. I have to say, and I preface this by saying, I think that I think we all agree here that maybe innocence is the wrong word, but it's certainly certainly was more of an issue of poor judgment as opposed to malice. But I think, but one of the issues, of course, that for politicians being held to a higher standard is the judgment issue, right? The public judgment of your public persona and the like. And it seems that certain politicians survive that kind of thing, and certain politicians don't.
Yeah. Well, one thing we were talking about before was, say Hillary Clinton reaching out to Dov Hikind, and I would be interested in seeing. I mean, it doesn't seem like this is going to, diminish his status as a sought-after endorser in citywide races. But I would be interested in seeing whether this impacts the willingness of, people running for statewide and national office to want to be seen with him and reach out with him.
Well, this did make national headlines, and he did get a little bit more publicity outside of New York with The Daily Show doing a spoof on it and others. But I think he's not as really well known outside New York City or outside New York State. I don't know if any presidential candidate ever reached out to him personally. They probably had people reach out to him. But I do think this will fade as time goes by, as long as I said before, he doesn't do anything else to cement that. I think what matters to the politicians, they do have to worry about the perception if they're seeking him out for an endorsement, what other opponents might say. But the important thing to the people who are seeking his vote is how his standing is among the people whose votes he can deliver, the people in his district. And I think that hasn't changed from this. I think a lot of them probably think this was a mountain out of a molehill, and a lot of them might have been wearing more outrageous costumes than he was. He pointed that out in several interviews, people walking around in Arab costumes and stuff like that. So I think his standing is undiminished in terms of the votes that they believe he can deliver. That hasn't changed because of this.
Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you for coming on and enlightening the audience on this, I think, hopefully, issue that will soon pass, but certainly something important for Jewish politics here in New York. And we hope to have you both back as we approach the 2013 elections. So thank you for joining us on Spin Class. Adam Dickter and Hunter from the Jewish Week. Hunter Walker from The Observer, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
You're listening to Spin Class, talking politics with Michael Fragan, and we are going to have a first here on the show, which is we'll give it a